It was around 11 p.m. on a Friday in October 2018 when Pastor Blessed Kelechukwu drove Mrs Ruth Andrew, who was the women's leader in his church, back to her home at a housing estate in Umuahia, Abia State, Nigeria. Some minutes later, he left the residence again with Mrs Ruth in his Infiniti SUV to an unknown destination. Ruth's daughter, Sweeney Andrew, had seen her mother return and also leave the house again with the pastor. Unknown to her, the series of events that would unfold in the next couple of days would be one that would not only shatter her heart into 1,000 pieces, but will also leave her with the kind of memories she would wish she never created. Sweeney had expected her mother to be back the next day, being Saturday, but when she didn't return home, she had to call her on the phone. Sweeney called her mother's face phone number, but it was unreachable. She then called her second number, but it was still unreachable. At that point, she may have probably thought her mother was busy or in a prayer session with Pastor Blessed. But in 7 days' time, her reality would turn out to be more unpleasant than her imagination at that time. When Sweeney couldn't reach her mother for about 3 days, she decided to file a missing persons report on her behalf at the Zone 9 Police Headquarters in Umuahia, Abia State. Now, while Sweeney was busy searching for her mother, Pastor Blessed, who was the last person she was last seen with, could not also be seen either. However, his own disappearance was carefully crafted and covered up so as not to arouse any form of suspicion. Pastor Blessed Kelechukwu was the founder and general overseer of the Wind of Glory International Church, a small Pentecostal church with less than 200 members and located in Umuahia, the capital city of Abia State. As the general overseer of the church, he was well sought after by both his church members and those who needed spiritual support and intervention. Now, since he left Mrs. Ruth's residence that Friday night, he hadn't been seen in person. However, he was answering his calls and also replying to all his messages. Pastor Blessed, knowing fully well that he would have to show up in church the next day to conduct his regular Sunday service for his members, then came up with an idea to avoid making a physical appearance. He made it known to his scholars that he was attending a church program and that he wouldn't be available. This didn't raise any suspicion because he was known to frequently feature as a guest pastor in churches across neighboring states like Akwa Ibom and Rivers. However, concern began to grow when his assistant, Pastor Kalu Ikeagwu, and their women leader, Mrs Ruth Andrew, were also absent from church that Sunday. The members didn't make a big deal out of their absence since information got around that Pastor Blessed was attending a church program somewhere. They probably thought the two other leaders also traveled with him. However, when their absence lingered for far too long, the concerned church members decided to visit Pastor Blessed at his residence in Umuahia housing estate, Umuahia, 7 days after he had gone missing. When they arrived at the residence that fateful Friday, they found the decomposing body of the church founder, Pastor Blessed Kelechukwu, his assistant, Pastor Kalu Ikeagwu, and their women leader, Mrs Ruth Andrew. It then became clear to them that someone else had been posing as Pastor Blessed the entire time he was lying dead in his apartment. Sweeney was informed about her mother's death. She then called the police to update them that her missing mother had been murdered. The police then made their way to the estate for investigation. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they carried out their preliminary investigations and found out that the deceased had also been robbed. His car was missing, and his personal items like clothes, shoes, and jewelry were also missing. There were also signs that his televisions had also been stolen. When they searched outside the fenced compound, they found shoes suspected to belong to the perpetrators of the heinous crime. The police began their investigations into uncovering the circumstances surrounding the tragic death of the three individuals. 6 days after this horrific discovery was made, the police received a tip-off that Pastor Blessed's car had been sighted at a mechanic village in Umuahia South local government area. The detectives were then directed to come to a police station in the area, where the mechanic caught with the car, Mr. Chibuke Peter, was being detained. The police swung into action immediately When they got to the station, they asked Mr. Chibuke how he got to be in possession of the car. Mr. Chibuke then revealed that he is a mechanic and that the said car was given to him by one Pastor Prosper Akachukwu to repair for him. Luckily for the police, Pastor Prosper had heard about the mechanic's arrest. Since he was in urgent need of the car, he headed to the police station to bail him so that he could finish up his car. When he arrived, he was identified by Mr. Chibuke and then arrested by the police. Pastor Prosper would then proceed to make some of the craziest revelations you'd ever hear. Pastor Blessed Kelechukwu established his church in 2013. He was alleged to have been in a relationship with the women leader of his church, Mrs Ruth Andrew. Ruth Andrew was said to be a divorcee with 3 children, and Sweeney seemed to be her eldest child. It was reported that her ex-husband resided abroad and that Pastor Blessed had plans to marry her. Prosper Akachukwu was Pastor Blessed's childhood friend and even best friend at some point. They were both from Imo State, but from different local government areas. The two of them attended the same secondary school and also started their gospel ministries together as co-pastors. At the early stage of their ministerial career, Pastor Blessed was said to have been struggling to grow his church. This was when Pastor Prosper stepped in to suggest the unthinkable. He spoke to Pastor Blessed about using Juju to perform miracles, which would also attract members to his church. Blessed agreed to his idea, and Prosper then took him to meet a native doctor in Ondo State. He also gave him the sum of 100,000 naira to support the trip. When they arrived in Ondo State, they met the native doctor and he prepared the charms for Blessed. However, the native doctor told him that he would have to visit the shrine once every year to renew the charms. According to Prosper, Pastor Blessed had been going to Ondo State to renew the charm as instructed, starting from that 2013 to the year he was murdered. After Blessed got the charms, Prosper told the police that it began to work and he started to make money from his church. He became popular and received invitations from other pastors to collaborate and also make guest appearances in their own church. Pastor Blessed started making a lot of money, and this was when things began to take a very dark turn. Now, while Blessed was living his best life, cruising with his Infiniti SUV and residing in a fully furnished apartment in a popular estate in the area, Pastor Prosper, on the other hand, was facing crippling financial issues. He told the police that whenever he reached out to Blessed for financial assistance, he would ignore his calls. When he finally answered the phone, he would warn him not to call his number again. Prosper felt betrayed by him, since he was the one who led him to the shrine and also supported his journey with 100,000 naira. This feeling of betrayal awakened some darkness in him, and he decided to attack Pastor Blessed to steal some of his valuables. In order to achieve this, he needed to know where he lived. It was revealed that Prosper kept on disturbing Pastor Blessed so much that he gave in and then decided to meet him in a supermarket in Umuahia. After the meeting in the supermarket, Blessed made his biggest mistake by taking Prosper home and then cooking noodles for him. Unknown to him at that point, he had just given Prosper the location of his house, which was the only thing left for him to begin planning his attack. After that encounter, Prosper went to Abia in the same Abia State to hire 3 assassins. He then led them to Blessed's house that Friday, where they hid and waited for his return. When Pastor Blessed returned with Mrs Ruth and his assistant, Pastor Kalu, Prosper signaled the assassins to set the plan in motion. Now, this is where the pastor gave a very conflicting statement to the police. Initially, he told the police that when the 3 victims returned home that night, he and the 3 assassins went inside to attack them. However, while carrying out the act, Pastor Kalu identified him and then called out his name, asking him why he was doing what he was doing. Since the pastor had identified him, he had no other option than to silence him, along with Mrs. Ruth, since she heard his name. Together, they butchered the 3 victims to death. Prosper later told a different version of the story when he was questioned again before newsmen. He claimed he was outside the house while the assassins carried out the attack, and that he was called inside after it was over. While inside, he found out that they had murdered the 2 other victims. When he asked them why, he claimed they did it because the assistant pastor recognized one of them. This appeared to be a lie, and he probably said it to get an easy landing, but unfortunately for him, it wasn't such a perfect lie. After committing the heinous crime, Prosper went back to the house the next morning to take his bath and also change into Pastor Blessed's clothes. He stole his shoes, clothes, wristwatches, phones, 3 plasma TVs, and ATM cards. Prosper then packed all the items into the pastor's SUV and carted them away. He took some of the items to his father, who was also living in Aba. However, his father rejected the gifts because he doubted the source of his sudden fortune. This may also have something to do with the fact that Prosper was known to indulge in criminal activities. It was alleged that it was his criminal ways that contributed to why Pastor Blessed cut contact with him. However, Prosper had told the police that Blessed cut him off because he said he couldn't keep him close since he knew his secret. After the father had rejected the gifts, Prosper packed them to his father-in-law in Imo State. There, he gave 2 of the TVs to him, along with other items. He also gave some cash to his wife, Precious, whom he wasn't living with. After this, he started posing as Pastor Blessed by wearing his clothes and crucifix and also carrying his staff. He answered his calls, replied to his messages, and then painted the picture that Blessed was alive but attending a church program somewhere, when in reality, he was rotting inside his residence. The police later arrested his wife, Precious, along with the 3 assassins. They were likely arraigned in court and also convicted of their crimes. Disappointingly, there is no information online stating that they were ever sentenced for these crimes. This case revealed a lot of things, but I will leave it to you to decide what to learn from it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more true crime stories. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay safe.